Well, we're a little bit late than normal, but we're live now here on YouTube. I've got my snacks that I need to have a chomp on, and I've got my pens that I need to be drawing on. We're going to be listening to some more of some playlists in the background, as I've got a new audiobook today. But yesterday we were listening to Dennis the Menace, and today's that word was misfit. Today, the word is sling. So I thought we'd have a look at the sling itself. I was going to try and maybe do something like a what is it called? Like an Angry Bird sling. But I thought to myself, why not try and have a go at doing my own hand, as well as holding the sling itself? Because yesterday was a little bit of an inspiration, because I was drawing this and I'm thinking sling today, and well, can't use it. I want to not draw another Dennis the Menace, because I'm done with that kind of inking sort of process, because there was a different way. Sorry, you can even see what I'm doing. Different kind of process. And today we're going to try and go back to a bit more of a detail, kind of like this kind of thing from the very beginning, because we are on day 19 today of Inktober. Again, guys, if you don't know who I am or where you are, I'm Blut084, BLUT084. This was day 1, Ring. Day 2 was Misfit. No, it wasn't, because that was the last one. That was Mindless, and it's got VR and a load more details in that video. Go and check it out, because this was day 3, and that was Bait, and hopefully you can make out what I was trying to draw and what characters I was on the day. Which this one, again, if you get the reference, definitely let me know in the live stream today. You learn absolutely nothing. It's just wondering if you guys know. And again, if you know who this place is, you probably are, because you've been following along on with my Minecraft endeavors and trying to build, because this is my sleep station. There's me flying away, because I always got wings, because we're building the Tower of Flight. Because at this point we are at here, and next Monday we'll be starting and continuing with building more, maybe just considering what else is around us and finding some more stuff to build with. But that's Monday. This was day 6 for Husky. And we kind of had a bit of a trouble with that one. There was so I changed it, and hopefully I saved it and didn't make as creepy as what it was. There again, made a complete boopsie of this one. You cannot still watch this because it's got heavy copyright. Because what I was watching. What I was listening to in the background was audiobook of Blade Runner. So don't do that if you're a YouTuber. Some audiobooks are okay, some are not. We will be listening to a funny one today. But this one was, I thought was enhanced, but the word was enchanted, like a dunk. I did the Olympics, and, I did, yeah. So day 6 was Frail, and I thought I did Old Lady. But then I thought to myself, Old Lady, blah. Whatever, and then she's a little bit. She's got a cauldron. Maybe it's a stew pot. She could be a witch. She could just be an old lady that's got lots of know-hows and spices. And then we get on to my favorite of all the days, which is day 9, which was the word was swing. And I like to draw Spider-Man, as you know. And I thought with only one pen, again, well, a few more from the pack, which are used for shading. Some of the dead or nearly dead felt tips I can kind of use as shading, and that's what I did for this area here and lower here. And to get this sort of idea, again, I copied from one of my favorite books and thing I wanted to draw when I was the age of 15, and now I'm 35. Here is the patterns. Well, I wanted to relax, and I didn't want to draw any kind of detail. So what's better than no detail is to draw whatever your hand wants to draw, and that's what I kind of try to do here. But try to do it in different shapes, and try to use different shapes each time. If you know this shape of this symbol, let me know again in the comment section. Here again, the day was snow, and the day number, we are on day 11. Which is getting really long, and I do this in every single video. So if you just want me to skip to the days that we are on, we're on day 11 now, which was snow. And I did a abominable snowman, but I didn't want to do like a cutie-dooty abominable snowman like the stupid films that making us buy and spend money on crap films. I want to draw something a little bit different. If you can see what I can see, you can see what I can see. But they're here. The day 12 was dragon, and I love draw dragons. I've only ever drawn them with pencil and then inked them and then done whatever else, say paint or go digital with them. I haven't digitized this one. I will be digitizing this one, because I've got to get myself back into that as we're getting a new CPU. This one here was one of my favorites and is one of my favorites and always be one of my favorites. My son finished this game for me, and when I was playing it, I felt like the boy was my son. It was very strange because of the dynamic in this game and what was going on. It's kind of close to home, but that's enough ooey gooey mushy stuff, because that was God of War for day 13, which was Ash. And then we're overgrown for day oh my god, look, I turned the pages because I keep forgetting. Day 14 was overgrown, and I did listen to an audiobook, which we had to flip-flop between 3 or 4 because some were Disney. We can't all listen to Disney on the channel. No. They want some copy. They want some rights for that, which is fair enough, but damn. Anyway, so that was Maleficent, which is, I think there's a number 2 coming out very soon, and this was just me doing another pattern, really, with overgrown vines. And then we get to one of my favorites, and it looks like one of your favorites as well, guys, which, if you want me to draw some more of, not say just this film, but a film of direction or a film cover or something that you guys think it would be cool for me to draw, let me know, and I will let you know when they'll could be happening. I'll maybe put out an Instagram vote over on Instagram, as well as we put Instagram votes for, and say, would you like me to draw this one or this cover? So I've got a few films that I still haven't sold because, you know, DVDs kind of died a few years ago, but I've still got this one, and I still love watching this film, and I may watch this at Halloween just for a film to watch with my son, because I have grown out of the films like The Wild Things. Again, this is from another cover of a film, which I looked at the cover because I just like wild. I don't want to do anything like overly stupid-eyed, you know, cartoon. I wanted to go a bit more real with this one, and again, I did a little bit of showing you how to on Instagram. If you guys did check that one out, that's showing you how to put a little horn through the wood, because I felt that this didn't look right to this side, so I did a little bit extra over on Instagram for you guys to go and check out. But it was live, so it may might still be available. It was available for 48 hours, as I tried to make that one for. Then we had ornament for day ornament for day 17, which we're getting very close to where we got to actually start drawing again. Where I picked myself a ornament off my shelf, because I don't want to do the old ball sort of thing and draw an ornament off a Christmas tree, because it's still not that time of year yet, guys. Really not. But anyway, I had this thing. It looked kind of interesting to draw with the twists and turns, and that's what I did with the different colors as well. And I added a little bit extra, and did a little bit get confused with this part here, but I think hopefully you can't really see what I can't see on camera. And then, yeah, of course, was Dennis the Menace, and that gets us back to the hold sling, which I'm going to be trying to draw right now for day 19, because that was day 18. So let's move you around. I'm going to get myself a playlist going in the background and stop talking to you, because I will then start doodling and see how far I can get, because I cannot really find a reference of what I want to do, because I actually want to use my own hand. Say I was holding the let's go this way, put my hand here, and I'm holding the sling sort of falling back, and that's kind of line the shot I would be trying to get, if you excuse my pun. But from my hand or where my eye sees, I'm going to maybe draw in my glasses as well, because that's roughly what I see. You know, I'm old, I wear them. So yeah, we'll see if I can get my glasses here, something like, maybe I could have it like there, and then my hand be here, the sling someone like here. Let's get you to move where I'm saying. So to get what I'm trying to say, but say I have my hands holding this one, and the other hand is, say, pulling back on the string. Can't have no string because I haven't got a string piece here, but kind of get the idea where this one's there, And that one's there. So I'm going to try much for the Gonna try and talk because I can't talk. Yeah, so I'm gonna try and draw this, and we're gonna be putting a playlist in the background. I'm not gonna be listening to too much childish stuff because that's what we're doing to a bit of a later on this afternoon. Didn't want to do a lunchtime because it's Saturday and yay! So let's get some thing on the background. By the ways of a playlist. I will let you know who this is, or they'll let you know who is. I could listen to the comic story if you like that. But I can't really find a way of tying it in or anything to tie in with Sling. So let's just listen to this one instead, eh?
Taking the Biscuit by Paul Lewis. Read by James Bolam.
I was freezing. My legs had turned to jelly, and my arms felt like they'd been stretched to twice their normal length. Even though I could not wait to get home, I had to concede defeat. Or rather, I had to take a break. The first two cafes I looked into were packed to the roof. It was market day after all. There appeared to be room in the third, and so I went in. Not the most impressive of places, I thought. But if it could provide me with a seat and a half-decent cup of tea,
draw my shadow.
I'd be happy. It was self-service only, and there was a queue at the counter. I put the shopping bags down while I waited, groaning aloud with relief. How on earth could two people eat so much? Or had Marjorie, my wife, amused by the fact that it was I who would be buying the groceries that week, being a little over-eager with the shopping list? Whatever. It was the first and last time I would endure the slings and arrows of Tesco on the busiest day of the week. Next Thursday it would be down to Marjorie again. I've no doubt she'll be over the hip replacement by then.
I think should we try and draw that, guys?
Counter,
sounds
I became convinced
kind of where my hand would be. So,
but a whole body replacement. A man with hairy arms came over and asked what I wanted. A cup of tea, I told him. Oh, and a Kit Kat, 4 fingers, not 2. A minute later, a cup was banged onto the counter with such force that it wobbled and rattled on its saucer. Beside it was dropped the Kit Kat. £1 5 the man muttered. I fished in my pocket for change. I was still wearing my gloves, but could not be bothered to take them off. Pulling out £2 coins, I handed them over and began to look round for a seat. Unfortunately, the place was a lot busier than I'd first thought. I held the Kit Kat in my left hand and picked up the cup with my right. When the man slapped down the change, I was left with no way of transferring it from the counter to my pocket. My ability to grip more than one item at a time was hampered by my gloves. There was an impatient cough from behind, and I realized I was holding up the queue. I tutted loudly in response. Some people simply have no patience. Ignoring the flurry of angry whispers, I put the cup of tea back on the counter, took off the gloves and pushed them into my coat pocket. I grabbed the change and gripped the teacup again and walked away from the counter. The first part of my mission was accomplished, though I have to admit I was not in the most pleasant of moods by then. The cafe was hot and noisy and absolutely filled with smoke. There appeared to be no hope of finding a seat. Perhaps if I closed my eyes and concentrated hard enough, I could use telepathic suggestion to make someone really want to leave. Then again, probably not. I was left with no choice but to swallow my pride and share a table with a stranger. The most likely candidate was in the farthest corner, a table for 4 occupied by a grandmotherly type. Surely she wouldn't object. I weaved my way around the pushchairs and the coats draped over seats until I was there. "Do you mind if I join you?" I asked the old woman. She looked at me. Her head moved so quickly it could have been a twitch. I took it to mean no, she didn't mind. I sank gratefully into the seat. "Place is absolutely heaving," I offered, trying to be pleasant. The woman, though, was having none of it. She simply slurped at her own tea and stared rather vacantly at the wall behind me. "Never mind," I consoled myself. "You'll be out of here and home soon. And then you can tell Marjorie you will never, ever go shopping again." I suddenly went cold. The shopping! I had been so distracted at the counter that I had left the carrier bags on the floor. Anyone could walk off with them. I lunged out of my seat and zigzagged back across the cafe. Luckily, they were still there. I picked them up and carted them over to my table. The old woman did not even blink at my return. Still, two could play at that game. I would make no further attempt at conversation. Instead, I simply sipped at my tea, picked up the Kit Kat, and began to unwrap it. I should explain that for years I've had a soft spot for the things. I even open them in the same methodical way, a minor eccentricity that drives Marjorie around the bend. So, first I took off the outer wrapper, which I folded over and over until it was the size of my thumbnail, and put it in the ashtray. I was amused to notice the old woman watching me. I sincerely hoped it irritated her as much as it did my wife. Next, I ran a fingernail along the edge of the foil until it could be peeled back, exposing the chocolate biscuit beneath. Finally, I exerted exactly the right amount of pressure to separate the 4 fingers without damaging them. By now, the old woman was staring openly at me. It was all I could do not to smile. I felt a ridiculous sense of victory, which vanished as the woman picked up a finger and ate it. I was too shocked to say anything. The nerve of it! Maybe she was upset I had invaded her cozy little corner. If that was the case, she should have said something. Instead, she'd stolen part of my Kit Kat. That was a declaration of war, and by God, I was ready for a fight. Looking her straight in the eye, I picked up the second finger and with deliberate slowness bit down on it. The woman's lip movement subconsciously matched my own as I began to chew. 1 all, I thought. She retaliated by snatching the third finger. By now, I was beginning to wonder if she was not so much upset at me as a little soft in the head. Her actions, after all, were not those of one blessed with a full quota of marbles. Not that she looked mad, but appearances can be deceiving. I was prepared to give her the benefit of the doubt, to bite back any words of remonstration I may have been tempted to voice. If I could square the score, I would be happy to leave it at that. My eyes narrowed in concentration. The noise from around me faded away. The cafe seemed to shrink to a small circle of reality, containing only myself, the old woman, 2 cups of tea, and a finger of Kit Kat. I licked my lips. My hand twitched in anticipation. I went to reach out, and the woman beat me to it. Only those who have witnessed the speed of a cobra's deadly strike could appreciate just how quickly she moved. One moment her hand was empty. A split second later, it held what remained of my biscuit. 3-1. Game over. I had to admit defeat, even though it had been my Kit Kat. I could not bring myself to say anything to the old woman. I knew it was an utterly ridiculous situation to find myself in, but I supposed I was as much to blame as her. I should not have allowed myself to be drawn into such a childish confrontation. All I could do was finish my tea, which suddenly tasted bitter, and leave with what remained of my dignity. Before I could, the old woman stood, and fixing me with an enigmatic look, began to walk to the counter. I wondered what she was playing at. Surely she didn't want a rematch. Well, if she did, she'd had it. I would be gone from the cafe before she returned. That was the plan, and it would have worked had luck been on my side. As I reached for the carriers, one of them tipped over, discharging 2 tins of soup and a bottle of ketchup, which rolled under the table. Cursing, I bent over to retrieve them. By the time I had returned them to the bag and straightened again, the woman was heading towards me, a plate gripped in one hand. No way, I thought. I'd had enough silly games for one day.
Oh, go put my hand down.
Just a quick glance as she sat at the table and placed the
Whoever
plate in front
stands
of her.
there for hours on end,
On it was a donut. One of those big, sugar-covered,
Doing
jam-filled types that, like Kit
those
Kats,
poses, you know,
have
those
always been a favourite of mine.
nude people.
I was
Do the
overwhelmed
nude
by a
thing.
temptation. I swear I tried to resist,
Stand there
but
for
was finally proved
hours,
too strong.
half an hour at a time.
Even though
Oh
the
my
bags
god,
were
my
heavy,
arm!
I managed to lift
Now I
them
broke
with
that
one
side
hand.
of my hand anyway,
I
but
stood
oh gee,
and casually walked round my opponent, my gaze fixed on the cafe door in case she looked at me.
I think I'll do
At the very last minute,
Go draw my
free
hand, my own
shot
hand
out and
itself. So there's
grasped
my
the
hand.
donut. Before the woman could react,
There's
I
the hand.
sank my teeth into it, tearing off a chunk.
Got,
and dropped what
it's
was
almost,
left
it's
onto
got
her plate.
fingers.
I straightened my shoulders and
I
licking
can't hold my
jam and
hand
sugar
anymore.
from my lips, marched past the tables and chairs, out into the street. A few yards down the road, I stopped and allowed myself to smile. I'd had my revenge, and yes, it had been sweet. The day had not been a total disaster after all. I could return to Marjorie with my head held high. Despite my elation, I found myself shivering. The weather was turning cold again. I noticed it was starting to snow. Putting down the bags for a moment, I reached into my coat pocket for my gloves, which is when my fingers brushed against the Kit Kat I had bought.
The Way to a Man's Heart by Norma Hawes. Read by Julia Mackenzie.
Gina stood half paralyzed by shock at the telephone. There was no recollection of how she had finished the conversation with Jerry Hiller. What had started as a simple call to make an appointment for a massage had turned into something else altogether. "We've all been worried about you. How are you managing?" Managing? What was he talking about? "Everyone at the club." There was a slight pause. "Our sympathies are with you. Hang in there. Men are such damn bastards." The fact that Jerry didn't quite fit himself into the male category allowed him to be vituperative. A wave of nausea overwhelmed her. What she'd always dreaded had obviously happened. So far, Bernie had always been discreet, keeping his liaisons outside their life, outside Toronto, in fact. Sometimes Montreal, sometimes Vancouver, but right in his own backyard. This was the final humiliation. At that moment, she detested Jerry Hiller, detested his false sympathy. The fact was that Jerry was the worst gossip at the club. It was amazing what people told him when they were slack and comfortable under his soothing hands. How long she sat by the phone, staring into space, she didn't know. She felt mortally ill, unable to move. The phone rang again, Margie's voice at the other end. 2:00, Gina." She didn't answer. "I've got a court for 2, Gina. Is that all right?" The last thing she needed was a game of squash. The very idea of walking into the lobby of the club filled her with nausea. Right then and there, she felt like going to bed, diving in and covering herself and hoping she wouldn't wake up. Poor Gina, poor dumb Gina, poor stupid Gina, who was getting a little fat and didn't know how to keep a man. They would look at her walking past, and safe in their own little domestic igloos would feel nothing but sympathy. But much as she didn't care about playing squash, she had to see Margie. Margie would know. Margie would fill her in on who it was. Later, much later, she sat sweating on the locker room bench, feeling drained and empty, but peculiarly focused on the subject she had to broach. She asked quietly, "Who is it, Margie?" "You were a demon today," Margie said, stripping off her whites and ignoring the question. "Who is it?" she repeated. "Who is what?" "Who is it that Bernie's laying?" Margie stared at her for a moment and sat down beside her. She dried her pink forehead with a towel and looked miserably at the towel as though she expected to see blood. "You really want to know?" "Why not? Everyone else does." "Patty Reese," she said, and looked up at Gina. "Patty Reese?" Margie nodded. It was rumored that most of the single men at the club knew Patty intimately, and that she wasn't averse to the married ones either. But Patty Reese was tall, blonde, and gorgeous, at least half a head taller than Bernie, and athletic, which is something you could never say about Bernie. Patty and Bernie? I don't get it. She stared at Margie, looking for an answer. "How power. Patty's into men who have power. And Bernie kind of fits into that category. She likes his profile, you might say. Margie wrapped herself in a towel. Didn't you know about Bernie? Margie asked, looking pityingly at Gina. I suppose I did, but it was never on the doorstep before. You think not? Margie managed to look embarrassed. Who else? God, I don't know. People like to talk. All I know is rumors, all rumors. Margie touched her arm. Throw the bastard out. Then what? Then get on with your life. Bernie sort of is my life. She stood looking at herself in the long mirror in the locker room. What she saw was still reasonable looking, if a bit overweight, but nothing was irreversible. Funny, she smiled at Margie. Things seem to be so great. Bernie had been so loving lately, so appreciative. He's in love with this gourmet cooking course I'm
There's
taking.
my reference.
Thought it was cute that I should do this now.
That's
for
what I've
him.
drawn. Okay, right.
Later in the coffee shop, Gina
There's one
asked,
hand, at least.
How
So
did
using
the
my
bird
shadow
get out?
here. Pause this a
Oh,
second.
Patty's been going round telling everyone.
So using my shadow here, I've managed to get the outline of my actual own hand, and using my own hand as a reference, followed the contours of where everything is whilst holding this, because I don't think I'd have been able to do it without holding something. So I was like, it's kind of the right shape for a sort of slingshot or a sling. Then again, I could go completely weird now. I could go completely weird now and put like a hammock there. What do you think? And like some other weird hammock missing. Let's do my other hand here, which again, maybe I'll use the pen. So I'm going to have to use my other hand. Oh, I'm going to have to draw my other hand without drawing my other hand. Or shall I use my other hand? Right, so, okay, is this going to be a good thing? I don't think so. Because I can't draw with my left hand. Put a few markers though. Because there's no way I'm going to be able to get any kind of detail. Let's put some markers to where my hand would be holding it. Because even putting these lines is very, very unsteady. Okay, right. I think that kind of worked. Now I can look at my hand and draw a bit, but I'm looking at my hand anyway while I'm holding something anyway. So, well, my hand was like this, wasn't it? Sure. Okay. I can still do that because that is my hand shape. That's where my hand would be. I was holding, put my hand back into that shape. So I'm holding something like that. Okay. All right, let's get that playlist back on because I need to concentrate.
And Bernie's leaving you. She has? Margie nodded. Oh, Jerry probably assumed it had already happened. Patty was a fool. She might not be any judge of character, but Bernie was deep in his gift-giving phase, one that told her he was dealing with a lot of guilt. Their lovemaking had taken on a new fervor, another sign of deep regret. She knew all the signals. Bernie wasn't about to leave. Bernie would deny to the death that he was having an affair. They'd been through it all before. Bernie was home for dinner that night. She served up bolito misto that had been simmering since morning at a low heat and topped it off with suet dumplings. Cooking was a way of temporarily forgetting about the pain. He'd brought her home a bouquet of roses and arrived early for dinner, kissing her neck and telling her that he'd thought all day about the food. Bernie loved his food. On her bad days, she told herself that she had cooked her way into Bernie's heart. Now, as she watched his heaped plate disappearing and saw the small layer of fat that ran round from Bernie's chin and bulged over his collar, She knew that if Bernie had to pick between sex and food, food would win out every time. She had made double chocolate mousse cake for dessert. He barely noticed that she didn't eat. Bernie was an absorbed eater, a concentrator on food. He didn't talk much when he ate, and never had. He wouldn't notice that she was quiet or that her face was white with the strain of what she'd learned that day. She put another helping of mousse cake on his plate and calculated in her head how many calories Bernie had consumed in that one meal.
Is a mousse cake?
Probably around 3,000.
Do I really want
Not
to
to
know?
mention the pancakes he'd had for breakfast and the lunch he would have had with one of his clients. Bernie didn't skimp on lunch ever. It wasn't easy to get through the evening without mentioning what she'd found out that day. The problem was the memory of all the other times. The accusations, shouts, screams, yells, the petulant, affronted Bernie, who swore always on his mother's grave that he was totally innocent, and next, inevitably, the love-making, which for her started slowly and stiffly, then his incredible ability to make her feel that she was the only one in the entire world who mattered. She couldn't face that tonight. She looked at Bernie's back as he spoke on the telephone. She saw the soft handles of flesh hanging over his pants. She heard him belch as he hung up the phone. He would have to take something for his indigestion later.
Oh, homie, I love you.
Bernie simply didn't know when to stop eating. He didn't even seem to be aware that he was putting on weight. How would darling Patty feel about him if he were fat and sluggish? She smiled to herself. For breakfast, she cooked savoury crepes filled with sour cream and brie. Bernie was ecstatic. Honey, you outdid yourself. He helped himself to the last crepe in the dish. Aren't you having any? I don't seem to have an appetite. You've been awfully quiet. You feeling okay? Fine. A bit tired. All that squash playing. Take a break. Have a rest today. Stop pushing yourself. She tried to smile, but nausea filled her empty stomach, and for an instant she felt like retching. Bernie's idea of what she would want to do with her life had to do with her lying around all day on the couch and eating chocolates. The more she thought about Bernie and his knowledge of her, the more she came to the realization that her likes and dislikes were completely unknown to him. The things he did for her were things he would like to have done for him. He assumed somehow that she was part of him and should cultivate his tastes. Too bad you can't come home for lunch. I'm trying out the quenelles, she said casually. He frowned. I have to go to Brampton. Maybe I can have someone to come home. Sure. She knew by noon his stomach would be growling and there'd be a phone call. She was a little generous in her estimate. The phone rang mid-morning. Hi, honey. Gonna take a detour and try out those quenelles. She smiled to herself. Great. She made some Lady Curzon soup and checked the refrigerator to make sure she had plenty of cream. By 12, it was simmering on the light. She stirred in the egg yolks and whipped cream and added the Madeira. Bernie was early, but luckily it was all ready. His eyes were shining. She noticed that the buttons on his shirt were beginning to pop slightly. It would take some tact to suggest larger sizes, but perhaps she could buy them similar to his old ones, wash them and slip them into the closet, and he might not notice. 6 months later, the once slightly overweight Bernie Ravens was unrecognizable to anyone who had known his 165-pound frame. He had gained 75 pounds, and everything had stopped except his enthusiasm for Gina's cooking. As Bernie got fatter, Gina got thinner, fed by her consuming energy to produce something new and interesting for Bernie to eat. She saw it all as a crusade to keep Bernie. When Gina looked at herself in the mirror, she was astounded by the face that was reappearing. She had dropped to a size 10 in dresses, and a kind of light seemed to have come back into her face, a light she remembered from long, long ago. She thanked heaven that all attempts on Bernie's part at love-making had ceased. He had tried only a few weeks back to heave his great whale of a body onto hers, and all that the encounter had produced was lashings of sweat as his body poured with the disappointment of unsatisfied desire. She knew, without having to be told, that Patty was a thing of the past. There were no more apologies for absences. Instead, Bernie was there all the time, out-of-town trips postponed, as he hovered near her in the kitchen, attentive and loving as he waited for her latest culinary efforts. But it was odd. Now that he was there, all hers, she felt nothing for him. It didn't have much to do with his size, but everything to do with his neediness and greed. Oddly enough, in her efforts to get Bernie back, she had inadvertently discovered two things: her own talent for cooking and the fact she no longer loved Bernie. A couple of weeks later, on Monday morning, she produced a list for Bernie and set it in front of his breakfast of pecan cinnamon toast and bacon. It neatly listed the week's menu. "What's this?" he said with his mouth full. "Dinner tonight. Gruyere soup, cassoulet, and apple pie. Tuesday night, squash and corn soup, ossobuco, cassis ice cream," she recited, enjoying the sound of the dishes that she'd devised. Bernie's eyes were shining, but not with their former clarity. She noticed of late that the whites of his eyes had become even more yellow. She might have been able to feel pity for him if there hadn't been a trickle of corn syrup on the side of his mouth, wending its way down on its sideways track to his chin. "Why are you telling me, hon?" He smiled lovingly at her. "Because I won't be here, and it's all in the fridge, labelled." He stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Where will you be?" She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she opened the kitchen drawer and slapped down an envelope in front of him. "This time tomorrow, I'll be sliding out of Miami, bound for the Virgin Islands, assistant chef on the Viking Princess Deluxe liner." Bernie's knife fell from his hand. "You're joking. You've been a great tester, Bernie. Thank you." "What about me?" "What about you? You can't go off like this without another thought." "I'm not, Bernie. I thought a week of food in the fridge would get you used to the idea, and then you'd have time to plan your menus and the rest of your life." Instead of putting the letter back in its envelope, she attached it to the refrigerator with one of the little magnetic bananas. She had its contents memorized anyhow, but it made it all official and final for poor Bernie. She congratulated herself for having been more than humane. Attached to the last container in the refrigerator, along with the vichyssoise, the pesto linguine, and the pot de crème de la vanille, she had attached a brochure from Weight Watchers and had heavily underlined the number of the local branch.
Okay, so
Edward's Problem by Judy Gardner.
I've done one hand. We need a bit more detail on this one, of course, but I've kind of put out where my knuckles are. That's what I was trying to draw. That was the difficulty in there. Trying to see where my hand actually would be and what kind of shape the hand here. This piece here, this piece, because of the way the light is actually hitting it for you as well. Where I've put this here, and I want to not showing that it's like a solid bone. You can see there's obviously flesh upon my hand, and a lot of hair. That's why I've done little scratches here.
Who joked with his wife
But
and
yeah,
rolled his laughing children in the warm,
so
pale sand.
let's get some more of this.
Apart from the baby,
I'm going to be
all the
holding,
children
so
were older than Edward, and they had all spent their previous holidays at the seaside. Only Edward looked at the glittering expanse of sea and the great golden playground of a beach, and found it as extraordinary and perturbing as the newly metamorphosed doctor himself. Edward had never been to the seaside before, and was only here now because Doctor had supervised his recent recovery from a serious infection, and then suggested to Edward's mother that a holiday would do him good. "I can't get away, Doctor. In any case, I can't afford it." "Don't worry about that, Mother. I'll talk to my wife and see if something can be arranged." While calling Edward's mother, Mother, in the same way that she called him Doctor, something was arranged. And the something was that Edward, thin, pale, and 6 years old, should join Doctor and his family on their annual holiday in Normandy. It had filled Edward's mother with the deepest misgiving that he should travel by plane to another country, and her voice had been no more than a creaking whisper when she answered the phone call from Doctor to say that they had all arrived safely and that young Edward was in the pink of condition. She tried to thank him, again because he was so kind, and because this was a kindness in no way promoted by the Department of Health and Social Security. But he brushed her gratitude aside with a laughing nonchalance that disconcerted her. For she was unable to see the Doctor transfigured by a holiday T-shirt, with a phone in one hand and a glass of duty-free in the other, while his family rampaged happily around. The other children, and there were 5 of them, not counting the baby, were very nice to Edward whenever they encountered him, but he tended to escape their notice as they rushed around the house staking claims on beds and spilling the contents of suitcases and rucksacks. The family rented the same big grey stone house every year and were rapturously possessive about its shabby, sparsely furnished rooms. To his relief, he had been allocated a single bed in the small slip room that led off the big one shared by Doctor and his wife and the baby. He was alone, the way he was accustomed to be. Without switching on the light, he undressed and crept into bed, then remembered that he had not said his prayers. So he crept out again, knelt down, and folded his hands against the quilt while he said the Lord's Prayer, before asking God to bless Mother and Doctor's wife and all the children. He opened his eyes, then closed them again and added, "And please forgive me for nearly forgetting." He fell asleep, exhausted by the day's wonders, and clutching Woolly Rabbit, whom Mother had packed in his small plastic suitcase. And next morning, after a late breakfast, they were all on the beach. Edward's mother had rifled her savings, and in addition to the suitcase, had bought her son a new pair of trousers and a shirt, new vests and underpants, and a sponge bag which contained a toothbrush and a face flannel, as well as a tablet of soap and a small tube of toothpaste. She had washed his hairbrush and comb, shampooed old Woolly Rabbit, and darned a hole in one of his ears. And then, as a final acknowledgement that Edward was indeed going to the seaside, had hurried back to the big store and bought him a pair of swimming trunks. They were dark maroon and rather scratchy. He sat on the beach in his new trousers and shirt, astounded by it all, by the sea and the sand and the clean, brilliant light pouring down on people, running, jumping, strolling, chatting, laughing. Others lay outstretched and motionless and glistening like sausages in the process of being grilled. One of Doctor's sons hurled himself upon his father and in an excess of puppy high spirits tried to lug him to the ground. Laughing, Doctor seized him and held him aloft and then swung him down, kicking and shrieking into the warm, soft sand. He began to bury him, heaping the stuff over him while the boy yelled for help, and Edward watched in silent fascination. Then the other children flew to the rescue, leaping joyously on their father and trying to immobilize him with their twining limbs. "Go on, join in, Edward," called Doctor's wife through her laughter. "Go on, go and help." Too diffident to obey, and uncertain as to which side he was supposed to take, Edward remained where he was. And when he looked across at Doctor's wife for further instructions, saw with horror that she had removed her T-shirt and underthing and was sitting there with nothing on her top. He had never seen a woman like that before. Instinctively, he switched his eyes towards Doctor, expecting to hear him remonstrate, but with the now defeated children lying in a panting, giggling heap around his feet, Doctor retrieved his sun hat, bashed it back into shape before replacing it on his head, and then, looking straight at his wife, said, "Is anyone else coming for a swim?" He looked straight at her and displayed not the slightest sign of shock. "I'll come later," she said. And to Edward's increased discomfiture, began to massage her two uncovered things with suntan oil. The children were now wrenching off their jeans and t-shirts in a headlong rush for the sea. The eldest daughter slid out of her flowered skirt and suntop to reveal a sleek black swimsuit with no back to it, and with the leg holes cut so high at the sides that they almost reached her waist. Humming to herself, she gathered up her thick curly hair and secured it on top of her head with an elastic band, and then began to run down towards the sea. The other children ran with her, whooping and laughing, and the 7-year-old paused for a moment to look back at Edward. "Come on," he shouted, beckoning. "Come on." "Why don't you go along with them down to the sea, Edward?" suggested Doctor's wife, screwing the top back on the bottle of suntan oil. She prepared to lie down in the sand on a large striped beach towel. "Come on in with me," Doctor said, and removing his red cotton shorts, disclosed a pair of emerald green swimming trunks. It had never occurred to Edward that Doctor might have a navel, and he found it upsetting. Very slowly he began to undress, unfastening the buttons of his new shirt, and then folding it meticulously and placing it on a little pillow of sand away from the hastily flung mishmash of the other children's clothes. Edward removed his sandals and his socks, and then his vest and his new trousers. Upon Mrs. Doctor's advice, he too was wearing his swimming trunks under his other things, and he stood there in them for a moment, pale-skinned and awkward, not knowing quite what to do next. Doctor took his hand, and threading their way through all the other family groups, many of the women in the same brazen state as Doctor's wife, they reached the edge of the sea, where the sand was hard and wet, and tiny white-edged wavelets tickled at their feet. "Lovely and warm," Doctor said encouragingly, still holding his hand. To Edward, it felt dreadfully cold. He gasped when the green-blue water reached the tops of his legs. And Doctor put his strong arm round him and said, "Come on, let's get the next bit over quickly." They were in the sea, really in it. And Edward discovered that if he gave a little jump, he landed slowly, rather like a balloon gently touching ground. The effect of this began to please him, and after several repeated jumps, he began to feel much warmer, and a little more in control of this strange new world in which he found himself. Doctor grinned at him, wet-faced, then, secure in the knowledge that Edward would make no attempt to go out of his depth, executed a porpoise dive and swam vigorously away. Everything here was brightly patterned, brilliantly coloured. The flowery beach umbrellas, the flaunting holiday play clothes, the striped canvas windshields, all of them given further emphasis by the clean, radiant light of the sun. There was very little colour at home. His mother preferred meek, serviceable shades that didn't attract attention, and the son had a job to find its way into their terrace house that failed. Edward resumed his rising and falling, and each time he submerged the tops of his shoulders, he spread his arms and allowed them to float on the water. Perhaps people would think he was swimming. He remained there for a long while, detached and fairly happy, while the multicoloured holiday world swept and splashed all around him. Then his dreaming eyes focused on the streaming figure of Doctor, who was standing in front of him with his hands on his hips. "Okay, Edward, not cold?" Edward shook his head in answer and made little lapping movements in the water with his pale arms. "All the same, I think it's time to come out now. The others are all going over to the store to buy some crepe for lunch. They're sort of pancake things. Why don't you get changed and go along with them?" Obediently, Edward followed him, and was surprised that it now felt colder out of the sea than in it. He fought the temptation to run back and let the water re-envelop him like a warm bed cover. His teeth began to chatter. "Come on, I'll race you," cried Doctor, and they began to run towards the family. The other children had already discarded their wet swimsuits except for the eldest girl, who, Edward saw worriedly, had pulled down the top of her black costume and was thus in the same state of undress as her mother. She too had got things, only not as big. "Edward, you look cold," said Doctor's wife. "Get dried quickly and put some clothes on." He picked up his towel and began to rub his arms and shoulders. The sand was sticking to his legs and feet, so he tried to brush it off, then paused to watch two of Doctor's sons lazily playing with the beach ball. He began rubbing his arms and shoulders again. "Hurry up, Edward," encouraged Doctor's wife. She was now sitting cross-legged, and her two things had turned glistening pink in the sun. He started on his chest. He rubbed down to his waist, conscious that the dry part of him was now deliciously warm, and the wet part beneath his swimming trunks clammily cold. His teeth chattered convulsively. Doctor now lay sprawled by the side of his wife, and one of the smaller children, a girl, but she hadn't got things, knelt down beside him and began idly filling his navel with sand. A period of torpor seemed to have fallen. People moved slowly, as if drunk with sun and salt air. But it became increasingly apparent to Edward that those who weren't lying down with their eyes shut were watching him. Watching and waiting for him to remove his swimming trunks so that they would be able to look at his part. It had no other name. "Don't forget to wash that part," his mother always said as she straightened out from washing his back in the bath. His face, neck, and ears would already be
May as well call it the
clean,
organ.
and from the way her expression seemed to tighten as the flannel flicked straight from his middle to his knees, he had known from earliest days that the part was of greater than the rest of him.
So I live with a
He still
13-year-old
didn't
boy,
know
and it's
why,
quite funny
but
how
just accepted
strange
the
things
fact
that
for
I
what
already
it
know,
was.
obviously, because I'm much older, because
"Would
I'm
any help, Edward?"
father and things, but it's
Doctor's
like,
wife changed her
I remember
position,
being like that.
stretching out her legs and leaning on one elbow. Her things
Yeah,
slipped
what is that?
sideways.
What is this? Oh dear.
Edward managed a constrained smile and shook his head. Holding the towel tight against his waist, he began to ease his trunks off from behind him.
Oh, fucking hell.
His belly and buttocks were wet and cold and felt as if they belonged to him. He tried to rub them with the towel while continuing to use it as a shield. "Hurry up, then," Doctor's wife said gently. They were all waiting for him, lounging in the sand in dry shorts and T-shirts, while Edward continued his lonely struggles with propriety. He had now worked his trunks down almost to his knees. Squirming, but without exposing himself, he had managed to dry most of his lower half, which felt gritty with sand, but a little warmer. He flicked a glance at the girl who had been filling Doctor's navel with sand. She had now piled the sand in a neat little cone shape and was about to stick a seagull's feather in the top. The eldest girl was slowly tossing a small white shell from one hand to the other, her small things tilted towards the sun like ripening fruit. Edward had never seen things until today, certainly not his mother's. She only had an indeterminate bulge beneath her jumper or beneath the brown dress that went with her mac and brown headscarf when they went to chapel. His dry clothes, neatly folded, were still on the pillow of sand where he'd left them. Aware now that Doctor's sons didn't include vests and underpants in their beach attire, he toyed briefly with the idea of dispensing with his own. But the idea of wearing his trousers and shirt next to his skin was too unorthodox for him to seriously contemplate, and a sudden spasm of misery shook him. He had tried hard, but he didn't like it here. It was too big, too bright, and all of it much too intrusively close. The hairy chests, the navels, the pairs of things, all of them strange and frightening, and they were terrible abruptness, bringing back the memory of that hot summer night when his mother's cry of, "Don't! Don't! You know I can't stand that part!" had snatched him from sleep, and he'd heard the frantically creaking bed, and then seen his father's moon-shadowed figure creeping from the room, pyjama trousers bunched in one hand, while his mother lay sobbing. "I love you," his father had said, standing in the doorway. "I just love you, that's all." And in the morning he wasn't there. Edward had never seen him again. There had only been him and his mother and the chapel. With the towel held close against his hips by his elbows, Edward finally worked his swimming trunks down to his ankles, then stepped out of them. Hoping desperately that no one was watching, he snatched a quick glance at Doctor's wife, who seemed to be studying her fingernails with extraordinary intensity. No one else was saying anything or doing anything. They all seemed caught in some long, timeless moment, with only Edward alone and quietly struggling. "Here, Edward, catch!" Suddenly the eldest daughter swung round to face him, and he saw a small white object flying through the air towards him. Instinctively he raised both hands high above his head. The towel slipped from beneath his elbows, and there he stood with the little white shell caught triumphantly between his palms. "Well done, Edward!" cried his wife. And Doctor himself, with his sand-filled navel crowned by a seagull's wing feather, lay back and clapped his powerful hands in applause. And they all looked at him. Looked at all of him. With love. The two parents, because they seemed to think that he had done something brave and magnificent. The middle-sized children, because they were hungry and wanted to go to the creperie. And the baby, because it had recently discovered that it could clap its hands together and the sensation made it laugh. "Come on, Edward!" cried the eldest girl, springing to her feet. She seized his hand, and with her young breasts bobbing and his small part twinkling free, they headed the merry tumbling procession towards the hungry smell of hot oil and frying pancakes.
Oh, Christ. I was like, shit, turn this off. This is going to a place where I don't want it to be. Is this not good for PG? Like, just an innocent little story. Oh, Christ. So I'm trying to build like obviously a target here. I'm going to try and, I don't know what to do here, but I'm thinking Robin Hood for some reason. So maybe put a Robin Hood, I think instead of a bow's pulled, it's he's pulling back with a, obviously his a acorn in there. I don't know if I've got an acorn right. I'm going to have a look at how an acorn actually looks, because I always seem to draw them like this, and I don't know if I've done it right.
Her senior was not Josie's idea of fun.
Snacks.
And it certainly couldn't match a fortnight in Mallorca, or a wet weekend in Torquay, come to that. Josie had always been obsessed with travel. The trips did not stop with the death of her husband in a car crash. A generous insurance payment allowed her to nip overseas as often as she liked. Neither did the birth of her children slow her down. She simply left them at home with her sister. They'd only get in the way. Her wheelchair hit a particularly vicious pothole. Josie cursed. "Sorry, dearie," said Mrs. Evans from behind her. "Wasn't looking." Typical. She had been ordered into the wheelchair because her bones were so frail. Now they were at risk of being shaken to pieces by an elderly woman who had not spotted a hole in the road roughly the size of the Grand Canyon. Josie knew she should have run for a taxi. What had she done to deserve this? Life had been fine until she reached the age of 50, and then everything started to go wrong. Her weak bones she could have lived with. Then along came the stroke, which finished her holidays once and for all. On the advice of her consultant, she moved to a bungalow on the coast. The sea air, she was told, and the easing of strain by not having to climb stairs would do wonders. Her condition worsened. Soon she was virtually confined to a wheelchair, able to walk only with the aid of 2 sticks, and then not without a great deal of pain. Her children paid her scant attention once the initial scare of the stroke was over. They visited infrequently, Her daughter telephoned once a week, and her son, successful as he was, put in the odd call whenever his busy schedule would allow. Forced to spend time on her own, Josie grew increasingly bitter by the day. Bitter when she thought about her children. Bitter when she thought about those useless bloody doctors. Bitter especially when she thought about how her life had wasted away. Holidays? Being pushed down the road to the village centre by Mrs. Evans next door was about as much as she was likely to get these days. Her obsession with postcards had started 3 years ago, with a call from her daughter, Carol. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" Yes, Josie had told her testily. "You don't have to worry about me. Anyway, Tony's only an hour away if I need anything." That was a laugh. She'd have to be at death's door for Tony to be dragged, kicking and screaming from his desk. Carol knew that, of course, but it wouldn't hurt to make her feel guilty. "Oh, I know," Carol had said. "Still, I worry about you. I hate to think of us enjoying ourselves with you stuck there on your own. If only you could come with us." "Don't you worry about me," Josie had responded in a tone which actually stated, "Just hope I don't die while you're away." Then, as an afterthought, she had asked to be sent a postcard. It soon snowballed. Tony would send one during each of his regular business trips abroad. If any of Josie's family and friends failed to take the hint, she badgered and pestered until they did. It was as if now she could no longer enjoy foreign places in person.
That's mine.
The postcards were the next best thing. Even Tony's partners sent them. Within 3 years, she had amassed a collection she was convinced would get her into the Guinness Book of Records. At first, these filled photograph albums. Then scrapbook after scrapbook. By the end of that 3rd year, Josie began piling them into boxes. She began a system of cataloguing those locales she had a pictorial record of, and those she did not. If she found out someone was going to, say, Jamaica, then she would make sure she had a promise to write before they left. If this meant ringing them 3 times a week, often late at night or first thing in the morning, so be it. Josie was not in the least worried. "It's gone beyond a bloody joke," she'd heard Tony mutter to Carol during their last Christmas get-together at his London home. Presumably, he'd thought his mother was sleeping. "I mean, it was fine at the start, but it's getting downright embarrassing now." "Come on, Tony," Carol had protested. "She's old and she's ill, and she's hardly putting anyone out just by asking for a postcard. Isn't she? You know Mike, our sales manager for France. He came back home early because he was hurt in a crash, and she rang him to moan he hadn't sent her a card like he'd promised." "Yes, well," Carol had murmured, "try to be a little forgiving, Tony. You won't be a problem for much longer." According to the consultant, Josie had a life expectancy of no more than 5 years. Her stroke and subsequent confinement had led to a general worsening of her condition. According to Josie, that was a load of bull. She was planning to stick around a lot longer than half a measly decade. The wheelchair hit another deep mine, and Josie wondered if perhaps she was being a little optimistic. Never mind. At least the weather was fine, which meant she got to leave the bungalow for an hour or two. Better still, it was June, traditionally the time she prepared for summer with a barrage of phone calls to find out who was going where. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, her immediate neighbours, had booked for Thailand. Thailand. This was an opportunity she was not going to let past. The Far East, about the only place left unrepresented in her catalogue. She could picture the postcard. A big bronze statue perched on top of a temple, set against a dazzling sunset. It would take pride of place on the mantelpiece, next to the urn containing her late husband's ashes. "Now, are you absolutely positive you don't mind?" "Eh? Mind what?" Perhaps distracting Mrs. Evans was not the best idea, but being sure about the postcard far outweighed the risk of being steered into a lamppost. You're sure it's not too much trouble? The postcard? Not at all, not at all, Mrs. Evans, a doddery, half-senile woman in her late 60s promised. Now, you just sit back and relax. If only, Josie thought. She closed her eyes, resigned to her fate, as the chair's offside wheel crunched over a broken bottle. If only. Somehow she was still in one piece when she eventually got home, albeit with slightly frazzled nerves. Josie was determined to spend the rest of the afternoon relaxing, daydreaming of a holiday on some distant sun-kissed shore. She paid little attention to the ambulance which passed her living room window. It was only when she heard the vehicle stop, followed by the slamming of doors, that she began to wonder if something was going on. So little happened in the village, even the smallest of dramas was worth witnessing. That was her philosophy. She peered out of the window, saw 2 ambulancemen carrying a stretcher from the Evans house. There was Mr. Evans walking alongside them, shaking his head, and was he crying? The stretcher was eased inside the vehicle, and Mr. Evans climbed in with it. Then the ambulance moved slowly away. Josie shook her head. What on earth was going on? Who was that on the stretcher? It couldn't possibly have been Mrs. Evans. She'd looked fine when Josie had asked her to wheel her into the village to pick up some groceries. Maybe the bags had been a little heavy, but Mrs. Evans had not once complained. Josie tried telephoning her neighbour's house, but there was nobody there to answer the call. It was late in the night when Mr. Evans rang her, voice tight with grief, to break the news. "It's Dorothy," he said. That is, her heart." He broke off, crying. Josie knew her friend was dead. The dreadful enormity of the implications struck her like a hammer. She felt her throat tightening as an awful sentence of loss began to build within her. "Does that mean," she said, "you won't be going to Thailand now?" And she was surprised and hurt when Mr. Evans slammed down the phone. Ah, well, they were church people after all. Church people, as in odd people, Josie tutted. She didn't believe in God. If he existed, then he'd have a lot of explaining to do to Mrs. Evans, who had certainly believed in him. It was several weeks before Mr. Evans spoke to her again. Even then he was subdued, almost cool. Josie assumed it was because he was still not yet over the death of his wife. She wanted to do something to help him get through the worst of his grief. But what? Stuck in her stupid wheelchair, trapped in the bungalow, what on earth could she do for Mr. Evans that he could not do for himself? She realized there was one thing. Talk to him. Give him some good, old-fashioned, common-sense advice. So she invited him around to tea, spent a lot of time preparing for it, and dressed in her best clothes. Mr. Evans seemed nervous at first, almost reluctant to talk, but before long, and with the aid of a few stiff gin and tonics, he was pouring his heart out. There, Josie comforted, patting his knee. "If you ask me, you need something to take your mind off all this." Mr. Evans remained silent as she explained her idea, and was in a strangely offish mood when he left shortly after. But he must have realized the advice was sound, because within a week he was on his way to Thailand. The poor man needed a change of scenery and a chance to meet new people. How else was he to try and forget his dear old wife? It was no good sitting around the house moping all day. Josie felt a warm sense of satisfaction. She had helped Mr. Evans in the only way she could, and now he would repay the kindness. It wasn't much to ask for, just a few shillings in postage, but it would mean such a lot to her. During the first week of Mr. Evans' month-long holiday, Josie got up from bed earlier than normal each day, just to hear the welcoming clatter of the letterbox. Nothing happened. By the end of the second week, she was almost at the end of her tether. What on earth was the problem? Maybe Mr. Evans had been taken ill. Maybe his plane had crashed. No, that was silly. It would have been on the news. Surely he couldn't have forgotten. Of course he would not have forgotten. Josie cursed herself for worrying. The card was probably on its way right now. The delay caused by the atrocious postal system, which seemingly afflicted every country in the world except Britain. She nodded and smiled. Just a few more days. That's all she would have to wait. It was on the Wednesday of the third week, a fine July morning, that Josie had her postcard. She was easing herself from the bed to the wheelchair when she heard the letterbox rattle. The almost inaudible rustle as something light landed on the hall carpet. It had arrived. Pain temporarily forgotten, she hurled herself into the chair and pushed on the wheels with unaccustomed force to speed her way to the front door. There it was. She leant over and snatched up the card. Dropping it onto her lap, she reversed into the living room and hunted for her handbag. She found it and pulled out her reading glasses. Then she looked at the postcard. The picture on the front did not look like Thailand. At first, Josie thought it was some kind of arty shot of a blazing sunset. Then she realized it was no sunset. It was an inferno. Flames seemed to lick at her, as if the postcard she held had suddenly turned into a window to another world. She could almost smell the smoke, and her eyes, for some reason, began to water. In the picture, the flames were parting. A figure began to take shape. Initially, she thought it was simply a man. Only there were horns on its head, and its eyes, staring straight into hers, glowed an angry red. As it came closer, its mouth opened hungrily to reveal rows of sharp teeth. A tongue, forked like a serpent's, flicked out at her. Josie gasped and flicked the postcard over. There was writing on the other side. Be seeing you very soon.
Dear Mr. Previn, by Judy Gardner, read by Prunella Scales.
Dear Mr. Previn, I'm sorry to bother you because I know you're very busy, but could you please tell me what has happened to my husband? His name is Kelvin Humberstall, and he's one of your flautists. He has brown wavy hair and horn-rimmed glasses, and he generally sits between a lady flautist with a page boy bob and a little bald man who plays the piccolo. I saw him off on Tuesday after an early lunch because of the rehearsal, but when I switched on to watch the concert in the evening, he wasn't there. I saw you all right and all the others, but when I came to look for Kelvin, he wasn't there. The space where he normally sits had closed up. In other words, the lady with the page boy and the little bald piccolo was sitting side by side with no Kelvin in between. And I haven't seen him since. I can't help worrying. But I decided not to go to the police or tell the newspapers or anything without getting in touch with you first. I tried to telephone you at the festival hall, but they said you never accepted calls from members of the public. I felt like saying that I wasn't a member of the public. I was one of your players' wives and that I was very worried, but they cut me off before I had a chance to say anything more. I suppose they're very busy too. But if you could just spare the time to let me know whether you saw Kelvin on Tuesday, whether he turned up for rehearsal and whether he looked quite normal and everything, I would be very grateful. I would add that our marriage is a happy one, and I'm very proud of Kelvin. My mother, who is now in her 80s, always gets him to play The Flight of the Bumblebee every Christmas. She thinks the world of him. Once more, I'm sorry to trouble you with this when I know how busy you are. Kelvin says you never seem to stop, but anything you could tell me would be greatly appreciated. I close an SAE and would point out that he has never done anything like this before. Yours truly, Brenda Humberstall. Dear Mr. Previn, you could have knocked me down with a feather when I got your letter. It came as a bombshell. Kelvin leaving just like that and going all the way to Barbados, all on his own, without me, and without even saying goodbye, without even telling me. I can't get over it. I keep sitting here thinking, what have I done? What did I do wrong? And not even to let me know. I know he thinks the world of you, but I do think he could have told me first. After all, he's married to me, not you. Kelvin and I have been married for 15 years, and we've never had a cross word. It's so unfair, but that's all the thanks you get. All the years of laundering dress shirts and pressing trousers and getting him off in good time and seeing he's got his flute and everything. I've never gone along with the modern idea of men having to do everything for themselves when they come home cold and tired after working hard. But there you are. That's all the thanks you get. I feel so hurt and angry and bewildered. All the same, thank you for letting me know and for being so kind in your letter. I know how busy you are. Yours sincerely, Brenda Humberstall. Dear Mr. Previn, please pardon me for writing again, because I know how busy you are, but I do miss Kelvin so much. To begin with, I felt very bitter and angry, but now it's just so lonely without him. I've got nothing to do. My mother is also very upset and says that Christmas will never be the same without the FLT of the BB. Poor old soul, this cold weather gets her down. And the neighbours aren't being at all nice. I mean, when Kelvin first went, I said that he'd gone on tour with you. But they kept seeing you on the box and said, how can he have? Where is he really? So I've had to tell them. And now those that don't snigger at me look down on me. It's very hurtful that people could be so mean when they must know how deeply hurt I am already. But there you are, that's human nature, I suppose. But I do miss Kelvin so much. I've got so used to doing everything for him. And there are times when I'd give anything in the world to have a row of dress shirts blowing on the line. I always polish.
Oh.
Because it gives a much deeper shine, and also it feeds the leather. And I always packed his bag very carefully so that nothing got creased, and there was always a nicely folded clean hanky on top. All this used to take up a lot of time, but I enjoyed it because it made me feel a part of his life, part of the orchestra too, in a way. But now there's nothing. I don't know what to do. I joined a flower arranging class, but gave it up because the others weren't very nice to me. And anyway, there's no one to arrange flowers for now. Please forgive me for taking up your time, Mr. Previn, but I just felt that if I didn't write to you, I'd go mad with everything so pent up. I know you are very busy, and I won't enclose an SAE because there's not really anything you can say or do. I've just got to soldier on. But thank you for listening, as it were. Yours sincerely, Brenda Humberstall.
And there you have it, everybody. The end of day 19.
Well,
I hope you've all had a very good stream. But today's artwork is good. And I'm finished on day 5. Sorry. It's frog in my throat. That is the end. That is my hands. And that is what I've drawn. Hopefully you've liked today's stream, guys. And that was 100. That was 1 hour and 20 minutes done in today's stream. Well, I thought that was going to take me a lot longer just to do the slingshot itself. And like I said, I wanted to keep to a sort of scene, a woodland scene with Robin Hood. And there's Robin Hood's little hat there. And he's having a little practice. Maybe it's one of his merry men. You never know. But anyway, because we're getting into autumn time, I wanted to keep it like an autumn sort of wintry Cornish sort of setting. And there's nothing better than making a slingshot out of a twig or a branch that you found that looks kind of like a slingshot. Because trust me, there's more there than you think. Because I used to make them as a child. I used to get myself either a shoelace or something if it was a spring enough piece of wood, or I'd get myself a something like there was rubber bands. You know, the old postman would drop a rubber band, or if your parents had a rubber band that came around in on your daily paper or whatever you had. Yeah, so I would get one of those and make my slingshot out of there. I did actually buy one once, and that I got in a lot of trouble for. I won't go into details. If people who know me and my stories, check me out over on Instagram. Otherwise, guys, don't forget to hit subscribe on today's stream. Tune in tomorrow, and don't forget to ding the bell so you know when I go live. Sunday will be another day, day 20. And today's, again, word was sling. Thank you very much for watching. Click the links that will appear if you're watching back. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.